Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is the Unspoiled Book Club covering Bag of Bones by Stephen King. In this episode, while Craig and Andrew believe the joy of discovery is crucial to enjoying any well-told tale, I will not be shying away from spoiling every story beat, necessary or not. Welcome to Unspoiled. Yay! Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Please introduce yourselves. Y'all know me. I'm Natasha. It's fine.
Hi, I'm Craig.
Hi, I'm Andrew.
We're the dummies from the Overdue show. We're here.
It's a podcast about the books that you've been meaning to read.
Yeah, you guys, I found you by accident. Well, I guess it's not really, but what constitutes a podcast accident? I was starting the book club because I had done Unspoiled for several years, and I had never done the book club thing, but so many people were like, you should cover this one book. And I'm like, doing a whole new feed for one book is kind of a lot. Mm-hmm. So I decided to do a monthly book club thing. And I had just finished Good Omens. It was the first book I ever did. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of feelings. And I was like, I've got to find somebody who's talked about this. And I searched Good Omens on the podcast app, and you guys were the first ones to pop up. And
that's a good hit rate, Andrew.
Yeah, like I had never heard of anybody finding the show through just like searching for somebody talking about a book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I assume most people find us because they like just go looking through like the mid-20s in the iTunes literature rankings, and they find us there.
Well, I think you guys are really lucky in a way, and it's not luck because you did the work for it, but you have a really huge catalog of books you've covered, so there are going to be things that nobody's really bothered with to do a whole show with that book name in the title. There were a couple things I searched today to hear other perspectives, and Bag of Bones was listed, but it was only like one thing that they touched on within the episode, and it wasn't focused on it. So I think that, you know, especially if somebody is trying to find Ghost Train, which I'm sure there's not too many on. That was one of my particular favorites.
So Bag of Bones by Stephen King hits us in the Spooktober section of the year, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
TM. And you've
all race reserves.
You've also done like a bunch of spooky books, and you've also done a lot of Stephen King as well, right? On Unspoiled?
I've done some. I'm realizing as I started to find some of the Easter eggs in this book that I haven't read as much Stephen King as I think I have. Because there were a lot of things a friend of mine brought up. It was like, did you catch this and this? And I'm like, oh, I didn't know about that.
Definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah. But, the one, like, I haven't read that much, and yet when I started this book, I still was doing the, oh, okay, we have another author protagonist. Oh, okay, we're in Derry again. Oh, okay, the number 19 is here again. So even without having a huge amount of his books in my repertoire, he's just, I guess you could say he's a little self-indulgent with his, self-referencing, but at the same time, he kind of pulls it off, so I give him a pass, where I think I might get angry at somebody else. Yeah. How about you?
Because on the one hand, on the one hand, he's obviously, clearly he's writing about himself. But on the other hand, like, he does make it fairly interesting. Like, I do kind of care that he's got writer's block and he's having trouble with it. So I don't know. He's a really confident writer. Like his characters all have really clear voices, which is something I appreciate. But yeah, I've pretty much only read it.
I've read years ago. I've read Cujo. I have read Gerald's Game, which is a hoot of a book. Boy. Yo, Gerald's Game, a lady spends most of the book handcuffed to a bed. It's a mess.
Have you seen that they made a Netflix original series of that book?
No.
They sure did. It just came out like 2 days ago.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing tomorrow. Okay.
I could swear that Gerald's Game is also the name of that old Pixar short where the old man plays chess against himself. What is it, Pixar short?
I don't. If it's anything like the novel, it better not be Pixar.
God, that would be an unfortunate coincidence.
Oh, it's called Jerry's Game.
It's so close.
I just can imagine
all right.
some poor kid Googling and just not being ready. I'm not ready.
I talked about, Andrew, when you read it. I've read Needful Things. That's a big old book. We've covered The Stand on our show as well, but I think I don't know. I feel like I've probably read one or two. My mom was a huge Stephen King fan, so we had a lot of it lying around the house. And
I think you were also exposed to Anne Rice and some others in that vein
I had a weird high school reading list.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Mom.
I just don't. Well, no. Somehow I ended up with copies of the Sleeping Beauty series also as a high schooler, and that's those are some books. Those are some sexy books.
Nice.
For your show, you've covered what? You've hit it as well.
I did it last year, which was that was an investment of time, ladies and gentlemen.
It really was.
I did it, and I listened to the audiobook too, which was hysterical.
Oh, sure.
Because I open it, and it's like, you have 43 hours remaining. And I'm like, well, guess I know what I'm doing for the rest of my month. But I actually finished it like a week early because I just couldn't stop listening to it. And then I'm doing Dark Tower right now. I'm the unspoiled one for that, and I'm on book 5. And... oh, I know there's other things. I should have looked into exactly how many of his different things I've read. He's one of those writers that, like, I really enjoy while I'm reading, but I totally understand when people are like, I can't stand his voice as a writer, and he makes me uncomfortable enough that I have a hard time coming back to him sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, I was talking to some friends earlier tonight about finishing this book, and I was saying, I might like Stephen King a little bit more if the male gaze was not like the main character in every book.
Yeah,
because he has a way of talking about women in particular that is just a tiny bit on the creepy side.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
That was something
with this one.
Have you guys seen the It movie that came out recently?
No,
I have not.
It was a lot of people like. I thought that it was very true to the book. A lot of people were upset about the gaziness on the Beverly character, but if you've read it, that's how it is, and it's super gross.
The book.
So I understand people having a problem with it, but also like that's the source material. So in a way, I'm like they did their job really well, though. So sometimes only one of you reads the book and describes it to the other who hasn't read it. Did you both read this one?
We both read this one. So, So there will be probably a little bit more finishing thoughts of other folks on this as, like, we're both more familiar with the plot than we normally are for our show. But we also tend to look a little bit into the author. Stephen King's is kind of a known quantity, as we've just discussed. I did find that the publication of this book was
contentious.
Yeah. As he told Time magazine when they asked him about 10 of his longest books, Stephen King said, I was squeezed out at Viking because Phyllis Grand came from Putnam and she brought with her Tom Clancy, who sold more books than I did. There was a feeling at Viking that they couldn't support two big money writers, and I was the one that went. In terms of profits and loss, that made sense, although Clancy's kind of dropped out of sight. Little dig at Clancy. But the people I deal with at Scribner, where he went, were people who were interested in the book rather than in the reputation of the writer, and he gives them credit for rehabbing his reputation. Part of that is that they went all in on it as a work of literature, because his sales had been sliding. He wasn't broke or anything. He's Stephen freaking King. But he wasn't doing as well as before, and Clancy was outselling him. And when Scribner picked him up, they sold it as a haunted love story,
right?
Not as a horror book.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I found this this piece on Tor.com, which dives a little bit further into like, so it's saying his earlier stuff like Firestarter, It, The Stand were all on the New York Times bestseller list for 35 weeks, Pet Sematary for 32, Gerald's Game for 28. But then in the mid 90s, he was going down to like 14, 15, 16. Like, I could probably write a book that would stay on the New York Times bestseller list for 16 weeks. Like, come on. And it's, you know, which is fine, but he was also asking for like $16 million advances on his books. And Viking, his publisher at the time, was like, we don't mind investing in a writer, but we also don't want to like publish this dude's books that we're just going to break even on all the time and like not make any money. So yeah, it ended up being this whole thing. And I think it pretty obviously informs the first like fifth or so of this book, which is about his the character, definitely not Stephen King, but Mike Noonan, the completely separate character that he made up.
It's kind of ironic that he's like crediting Scribner with being like, oh, they cared about the book as a piece of artwork and not about, and he's the one asking for insane advances.
Yep. They did, but another thing that they did was they focus grouped a lot of stuff, and they found that women in particular were reading him less because he was getting pigeonholed as a horror writer, which, I mean, if you write horror books, that's going to happen, I think.
I mean, I just can't imagine that marketing this as a like supernatural romance and then having it go the direction it does and kind of shocking your reader is better for your reputation. But, you know, what do I know? I don't sell books for a living.
Exactly.
It ended up like winning. It won the Stoker Award. It won a British Fantasy Award, a Locus Award, and at least that Tor article positions it as like a new phase in Stephen King's career, where he's this kind of like higher cachet, not a genre writer in the way that he always was. Even though I think some of the previous books are probably of a grander scope than this one, even if they were like genre horror books. He did apparently write it longhand, which I find fascinating, considering the agita that our Stephen King surrogate Mike Noonan has about his word processors in his book. So yeah, it also trades a lot on Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. So I think that maybe also be where the haunted love story stuff comes from. This like old romantic ghosty thing that isn't gonna have like a clown like tearing a kid apart or something.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can see categorizing it that way if you only read the first half of the book, pretty much. And it was such great timing because I did not have anyone advising me to do this, but last month's book was Rebecca.
Yes,
nice.
I noticed that.
Yeah, it was not on purpose. I had never read it. I did not know that it played so heavily in this book, and I had never seen the movie, so I didn't realize, like, you know, that there could be a connection there. So when he quoted it the first time, it's like, oh, neat, I just covered that. And then all of a sudden it started coming up over and over again, and I was like, holy shit, that's so perfect. But
So you want to get into the book?
Let's do this.
So, Andrew, tell us a little bit more about Mike Noonan when we meet him at the top of the book.
All right. Mike Noonan is a modestly successful genre fiction writer. Surprise,
Are you reading Stephen King's Wikipedia right now?
And so he is doing pretty well. He's living with his wife, whose name is Jo. And one day she just like suddenly dies of what's the
aneurysm?
Exact, yeah. That's what it is. And so what happens as a direct result of this is he is in an extended period of grief that he's not really admitting to himself is grief, and it primarily manifests as wicked writer's block. Like every time he hops on the old Power Book and opens up some ancient version of Microsoft Word to write, he is seized by like nausea and like all this physical discomfort that just that just completely overpowers him. And So he's got, like, in the past, he wrote 2 manuscripts a year instead of just the normal 1 manuscript a year that he normally writes. And so he had like 4 or so books that he could just burn off. So he starts sending those to his publisher. And as the like main action of the book opens up, he is sending the last of those reserve books in to his publisher, and there's no end to his writer's block in sight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And having like a pretty great like spat with his publisher that seems not at all informed by the history of this book.
I love that you say, like, as the main action of this opens up, and that's like 200 pages in.
I know, right?
It took a long time for this to really get rolling, and in some ways I don't mind that, because I'm the setting of atmosphere and his history felt important at the time, but looking back it doesn't seem as important once I have the whole story kind of in mind.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
One of my co-hosts had been reading it in order to listen along later, and he messaged me on Facebook and was like, so is this book like 75% navel-gazing, or should I give it a chance? Because I'm really ready to just put it down.
It's only like 20%.
Yeah, probably
it's
around.
not that much.
Well, I think the opening 5th to 3rd of the book has an interesting structure, because he walks us through discovering that his wife died. Mm-hmm. And like on the first page is like, in the town of Derry, you find out that people died because you see them on TV, and you're like, well, that's a bummer. Mm-hmm. Oops. And that he also finds in that moment that she had like a pregnancy test in her purse, and they confirm in the autopsy that she was pregnant, even though they'd been trying for a while and never had a kid. And so that's weighing on him. And then
there's this weird little aside where Mike Noonan is like, I had a low sperm count. Not that low. Like, mostly it was fine. But it was enough that we were having trouble conceiving.
Bad case of writer's block, am I right?
Medical results printed on the final page so that you can just so you all know. I mean, I just want to be clear. Yeah.
And so that's like that kind of whole thing. It opens like he's talking to the truck driver that like got in an accident that has nothing to do with his wife's death in like a tragic way, where she's like going to help people in a parking lot and she just falls dead. And then there's like a scene with her brother, and you're walking through his backstory while this like publishing stuff drama is happening. And you're right. It feels like some other book is going on. Like you don't know where it's going. He starts to have these weird dreams of the house that they owned in Maine, and then that's really where the motor gets going. This house called Sarah Laughs in a town that I think doesn't have a name. It's just called TR90.
It's an unincorporated territory, which I only just learned about a few months ago regarding something else. And I didn't know that these are actually way more common than I thought. And the whole politics surrounding that is bizarre. But yeah, so I kind of like that he does that too, because he's sort of like, yeah, here goes this weird little town that's kind of like an anomaly and doesn't really exist.
Yeah, sure.
No.
And it can, and as the book goes on, he can like define it by the 5 major things that happened there, and like not have to wrestle with any other larger lore or fiction, because he is really into dropping little references to the real world in not the TV show, not MTV's The Real World, but he's not referencing like Puck or whatever, but he is like talking about baseball games and making jokes about the mute button on the remote control, and let me, like Andrew was saying, like talk about actual writing software and name check Danielle Steele and a bunch of actual authors in like a slightly petty way, maybe not slightly. And
Danielle Steele
but then he can like take this character and put him in a place that is completely walled off from our reality, which is interesting. So yeah, those dreams are weird, huh? That's where the Rebecca stuff starts.
Like, when you're talking about these dreams, I'm like, yeah, they're real spooky and weird. The later dream, there's one in particular that just felt like it went on a real long time and was super uncomfortable for me. So
we'll get there.
I get kind of like with with King sometimes, and I know that part of what he loves is to like pull in a dream or a vision sequence and not make it clear that that's what's happening until you're like halfway into it and you're like, oh, okay, this isn't real, or is it?
Yeah, right.
But yeah, the dream thing was where I kind of wish the book had actually started. I wish that we had started with this and gotten a little bit of like a covering what had happened in a, not necessarily a flashback, but just a little bit of an info dump. And we started here because this is where I started to be, oh, he's getting like called to this house. This is weird.
Yeah, right. Like there's a lot of repetition in this book, and I think some of it helps build suspense and like create atmosphere, and some of it is just repetition. Like I do think if the book had started with the dreams instead of with Stephen King just like working some stuff out for 200 pages, I think the reader could pick up through context clues. Like he had a wife, she died suddenly and pregnant and under mysterious circumstances, and it turned out she's doing some stuff secretly and not telling him about it, and so that's like a little sub mystery that needs to be wrapped up. And yeah, this doing the step by step. Here's everything that he did every day for the entire 4 years, and now we're gonna start telling our haunted love story. But
yeah, that like 4-year interim should not be feeling like 4 years to me.
Yeah, because there's the dream. So he's having a series of dreams about this house called Sarah Laughs that they owned together, he and his late wife. And
like a summer home.
Yeah, like a summer home.
Northern Maine, I think.
Yeah, TR-90, not a calculator. And he like is seeing specific things about the house. Like there's like overgrowth. There's like a sticker on a sign or something. And then he gets spooked by one where like a creature or a ghost or something comes after him. And he wakes up like on the floor having like jammed his head against the wall and soiled himself, and it's just a bad time.
Oh, I forgot that detail.
Yeah, I know. It's like, ooh. But that could be the opening of the book. Like, ooh, I had a spooky dream that caused me physical harm. And now I'm going to go to the place in the dream to see what's up.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of like the crux of his writing, to be honest, is that he does a lot of table setting that may or may not actually be necessary. And it really depends on what kind of reader you are, if you're into that or not. And that's a big factor in it also, is just the extensive setting for every single character. And when you have like 5 main characters, that is a lot of time. So
yeah, because that book really does not get going until almost like halfway through, as I recall. Like it takes a while.
So then he goes up to this house. He's like, as you said, Andrew, he's like, I'm going to break this writer's block. I'm going to go up to this house. I'm going to deal with the fact that I haven't been there since my wife died. And there's like a sequence where his first visit there, it doesn't feel good. And his first night there, he hears like a child crying. And then he's like, well, maybe that's a ghost. Maybe it's the pipes.
Maybe it's the pipes, yeah.
Oh, my God.
I've ever been in an unfamiliar house and been like, is that a ghost or something in the house, I guess? I don't know. I don't know if I actually believe in ghosts, but I can get spooked by the idea of them. Mm-hmm. That's true. That's a truth.
Same.
And so you're like, oh, okay, so he might be in this haunted house and he's going to have to deal with that. He's going to have to deal with his wife or whatever. And then turn the page, new chapter. Let's have a new story. Let's have a whole story about this lady and her daughter that's going to take over the rest of the book.
Yeah.
Walk me through that opening, that highway scene.
Okay, so here is a little girl walking down the middle of the road. And
he's just trying to get a burger. He's just trying to go get a burger, right?
Yes, he's just trying to live his life. People, God. And this little girl is in the middle of the road, and he was going somewhat slower than most people and is able to hit the brakes. But if he had been traveling at the average speed, she would have died probably.
Yeah.
And he jumps out, grabs her. Her mom comes storming up, and he expects her mom to be this really trashy, abusive, terrible. And this was something that I was kind of like,
yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, I'm like, I kind of get it. On the other hand, I'm like, just don't, though. Can you not? And the fact that she's super pretty and looks so much younger than she... Oh, I can't believe you have a daughter.
Yeah, right.
And also is actually affectionate to her child and apparently concerned with her well-being. Both impress him to a degree that I don't really feel is appropriate. And
well, because for a while he like expounds on how she must be trailer trash, like awful, whatever, and it's his the way that he thinks about both Maddie, who's the mom, and Kyra, who's the daughter, sometimes is just really uncomfortable.
There's the part where he envisions, like, he catches himself thinking about what's going to happen when Kyra, let's go with Kyra.
I think Kyra.
I think.
They say a few times, like, Kai rhymes with
Oh,
Kai.
you're right. Sorry.
Yeah.
Where, like, he's like, oh, well, when she grows up, she's going to get pregnant early and she's going to have 2 kids and one of them's going to be trash.
I forgot
and
about that.
like,
Ew.
and then he's even like, that's not cool. I'm like, no, it's not. Just, you didn't need it. It's okay if you didn't think that.
I think, too, it just has an extra, like, edge to it because he's supposed to be this millionaire.
Yeah.
So it just feels, like, so extra classist coming from that particular character. And maybe he wants... but, like... There are times where I feel like that's done intentionally, and I feel like that is not supposed to be our takeaway from this character. And he kind of showed his hand there for a second.
Yeah, right.
That's a thing that happens throughout the book, right? Is just this like, are we supposed to be okay with this guy? And I'm all for playing around with that line, but like this book spends too much time on the wrong side of it. I think, where it's like we're too invested in him to cast enough judgment on him, I think.
I'm trying to find a specific passage where he's talking about this 3-year-old. I was glad I was too old to be one of her future boyfriends. She would have them jumping through hoops all through high school and college. Hoops of fire, likely. Well, the high school part anyway. Girls from the double-wide side of town did not, as a general rule, go to college unless there was a JUCO or a Voc Tech handy. And she would only have them jumping until the right boy, or more likely the wrong one, came sweeping around the great curve of life and ran her down in the highway. Her all the while unaware that the white line and the crosswalk were 2 different things. Then the whole cycle would repeat itself. It's just like, what?
I mean... Yeah, and then and he's in the middle of being impressed by this lady because she's pretty and nice, and
also she has like fancy. She reads real books in her trailer, and she has like paintings on the wall, sort of.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, do you play video games? Really? Do you like comics? Well, name me one character from. I'm just like, dude, you need to not have this weird checklist. And then he notices people slowing down and really staring, and to a degree that he's like, what the hell is, like, he knows that this town, people are in each other's business, but it just feels extreme even for this area. And later on, we find out that she is related to a person of importance in town, and so everybody is kind of up her ass all the time.
Yeah, so she is a recent widower. She was married to the son of a like crazy old software evil millionaire who like left. He's like an evil Bill Gates.
Yeah,
who
kind of.
like left town and may or may not have started a huge fire when he did so that like burned a bunch of houses and killed some people. And Andrew, I made a note of this guy. This is Max DeVore, who is this software mogul. Let me know if you know what any of this means, Andrew.
Okay, sure thing.
He started when memory was stored on magnetic tape instead of in computer chips, and a warehouse-sized cruncher called UNIVAC was state-of-the-art. He was fluent in COBOL and spoke Fortran like a native.
Yeah, those are all things.
Those are all things?
Yeah.
What is Fortran?
I don't buy it.
Fortran is a programming language.
Okay, it's not like a Star Trek species?
Well, no.
I thought that it was a really ugly subreddit. Is it not?
Listen, it can be a lot of things. The
Are you
Fortran
looking
can
up
be
what
a
it is?
violent warrior race from the
Sure.
Beta Quadrant, and also it can be a programming language.
So Max DeVore becomes our like antagonist aside from ghosts, but I don't want to miss this opportunity to share a quote from Stephen King from a CNN interview he gave around the publication of this book. He's talking about Mike and Maddie's relationship because lo and behold, something's gonna happen there. He's looking at her too much for something not to happen.
He talks about her boobs like a lot. Like a lot.
I mean, he says a lot. He's like, they're small, but like I like them, and you're like,
but
stop
like they're
it.
nice. Like
Oh, it wasn't
real
that
bad.
low.
and my
So-
totally within the normal range sperm count.
Yes. He says, in several of the reviews of Bag of Bones, people have said about Maddie that she's an unformed character, that she's not as satisfying as some of the other characters in the book. Well, I'm sorry, but when you have a 20-year-old girl who lives in a trailer, who's been married since the age of 17 and widowed a couple of years later, who's trying to sort of scrape by, that is not the stuff of which fascinating, paradoxical, bewitching characters are made. So I did the best with
Wrong.
what I could. Stephen King!
Wrong.
Jeez. So yeah, the
Like,
only
listen.
people in life who can have worthwhile, like interesting experiences are troubled middle-aged male writers.
Like, this is the
Obviously.
evidence of somebody who doesn't know a lot of people in this situation and knows
Yeah.
them as a kind of like anecdotal, because those are some of the
Yeah.
most interesting people because they've had to go through some shit.
Yeah,
I know.
exactly.
Yeah,
But-
this is a 20-year-old interview. I wonder if I presented Stephen King with those words today, if he might be like, ugh. I don't know. I would hope that he would have that reaction. I hope he wouldn't just be like, hey, Craig, life is what it is, and then like throw money at me and tell me to leave.
Yeah, there are some things that I'm on tape saying from my podcast 5 years ago that I would not enjoy having thrown in my face. So, you
Yeah,
know.
it happens. We all grow up, but he was old when he said that. Or
That's fair.
older anyway. So this plot becomes like the new thing, and it relates to the books that Noonan writes. So he writes like pot boilers where a young lady meets a mysterious older stranger a lot. So and this is something I think King does a lot too, right? Where he like part of the advantage of having a writer as your main character is that you can drop literary references and kind of slyly reference that you're reading a book in the first place as like an excuse to get out of some stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, right, exactly.
As like
Yeah.
you can drop a cliched situation or a relationship and like say you're commenting on it.
Yeah,
or-
right. And then you have Mike in a little aside being like, wow, if this was a plot point in a book, it would be like this. It would be
Yep.
saying this thing.
And then that happens, yeah.
If somebody wrote this, I would never believe it, but here it is. Huh, it's so weird you say that.
So the big story is that the evil computer grandpa is trying to steal this girl.
Can you
and
please just call him that for the rest of the episode?
That's-
Computer
I'm trying to figure out which moniker is going to stick. I think it's evil
I think
computer
evil
grandpa.
computer grandpa is it. Yeah.
He's
I'm
trying
picturing
to,
some kind of robotic character from
Yes.
Futurama that's very
Yes.
an old man. I like
Yes,
it. Yeah.
Yes.
some sort of old grandpa bot, and he is gonna steal this little girl, and so now this rich writer hires a lawyer to like win this custody battle, and this plot
We
is
talked about why he feels like he has a right to this little girl in the first place, right?
No,
Like,
hit me with
Maddie was married to his youngest son, who died in a storm, I guess, basically, and yeah, he wants his heir, at least on the surface. Like for most of the book, that is the conflict we are dealing with.
Yeah, and there's like a sense that he like Lance was supposed to live a different life, but he chose like a trash life with Maddie, and DeVore's people are trying to frame her as some like terrible mother, which is why this whole like girl wanders into the road is such a bad situation.
Yeah, you know. I just like oh man, the thing that really got me about Maddie's character over and over again is that he's written her as this like really trusting, sweet person. And I'm sorry, but once you get to that point where you've been like fucked over and screwed with as much as she had been, that's not really going to be a like defining characteristic of your personality anymore.
Yeah.
You've been spending 100% of your time defending your child from being taken from you. So
Yeah,
I
she
found
still goes and works at the library, and then like is surprised when, given the circumstances, she gets mysteriously fired, and it's like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah. Like,
well.
I've got to imagine that eventually you would take a dim view of like rich strangers offering to help you out, which is what Mike does.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is just like, if I had been in her position and some dude swoops in and is leering at my small but appealing breasts and offering me lots of money to help me, I would be, all kinds of alarm bells would be going off. And I guess we're supposed to think Mike is so charming and so clearly trying to do the right thing and has such a like honest nature that is immediately apparent that she trusts him, but it feels like she trusts everybody.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah.
Even though the town is like turning their back on her.
Yeah,
like,
the
completely.
town has been like spying on her on behalf of like what equates to like her nemesis.
Yeah.
And she's
Evil
still
computer
just,
grandpa.
Yeah.
And this is all happening while Mike is slowly being increasingly haunted in his house in Sarah Laughs. So like stuff like, you know, the child crying pipes, and he has a deer head on his wall named Bunter that has a bell, and sometimes the bell rings, which is like a callback to when he and his wife had sex on the couch all the time, and they'd talk about it like being that they were ringing his bell, which is sort of weird.
Oh my God.
They're weird. They're a weird marriage.
They were a very sexually active couple,
Yes,
BT
they were.
Dubs. He talks about that a whole lot.
He does.
There's nothing wrong down there.
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
Everything's great.
All the pipes work. And then
Unless they're haunted by dead children.
Yeah, like he can't tell who's haunting it. He starts getting messages on his fridge. Like he has the fridge letter
magnets. Yeah.
Which you have, Andrew. Have you ever
do.
gotten a message from ghosts on your fridge?
I've gotten like notes from my father-in-law where he'll come and visit, and then he'll write something weird on the fridge, and I won't notice it for 2 weeks. I'm like, how long has it said that on our fridge?
So the answer is yes.
The answer is
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that this just turns into like instant messenger for him for a little while.
Uh-huh.
AIM is shutting down, but
at
we've
first
got it on
it's-
our fridge. It's fine.
At first, it's happening like when he's not around, and then like he just starts watching it happen. Like he just starts watching the magnets move. And with most haunted house stories, I just have the reaction of like, "Why are you still there? Why don't you leave?"
And this, like, to jump ahead just really quickly,
Yeah.
there's this reveal later that, like, he gets all of a sudden his writer's block is gone and he can write. And he was like, oh, how mysterious. I'm churning out pages. And then it turns out that, like, the first word of each sentence on a certain page writes the sentence. They can use letters on your fridge. Why didn't they just write this out on the fridge in the first place? I don't understand. It's not a long sentence. It's the owls are under the shed or something. Like,
Yeah, it's so the like his Sarah Laughs the house, which is a weird name for a house, and I'm never gonna not think it's weird. It's like thematically it works for the book, but that doesn't make it not a weird name for a house. There are at least 2 ghosts in there that appear to be like fighting each other. So there is one like sort of benevolent presence who he's pretty sure is his wife Jo, who is telling him to like stay and to help out Maddie and Kyra. And then there's this other presence that is like, and I my understanding was that the owl message in the book that he was writing had to be that subtle because otherwise like the malevolent ghost would have like noticed it and put a stop to it,
Because
like
the malevolent ghost isn't a fan of his book, so wasn't going to read his stuff.
exactly. That's how you know she's bad. She doesn't like those Mike Noonan classics. But so what ends up to like skip ahead, I guess, and fill out the rest of what this ghost story ends up being is back around like the turn of the 20th century.
Yep.
There was this woman named Sarah Tidwell. She's a black woman who lives in this community, and and is a singer, and she is pretty well regarded. Like, everybody's still pretty racist, but they like her singing. And she and her young son and other family members are sort of making a home in this community. And there are some men who really don't like it, and they come upon her while she's out walking one evening, and they all rape her and end up killing her and her 3-year-old's boy.
Yep.
And so what ends up happening is her ghost ends up haunting the families of all of these people, and basically all of these families have kids that they give some name that starts with a K, and then when they're around 3 or 4 years old, their parent, one of their parents, kills them under mysterious circumstances.
Yeah.
Usually some sort of drowning.
Yes.
And so Mike, it turns out, has a tie to one of these guys, he was his great uncle or something, and so this malevolent ghost is trying to kill Kyra because she's a small kid with blood ties to these people who did this awful thing.
Yeah, including an ancestor of Computer Grandpa, of evil Computer Grandpa. He had an evil analog Computer Grandpa.
Wasn't before computers, though. It was an evil lumberjack grandpa.
Well, it was an evil abacus grandpa.
Yes,
was part of that whole scene, and so Kira is being attacked there. And it's also worth noting that Mike, when he initially hears Kyra's name, freaks out because he wanted to name his daughter Kaya, and so he's like, "Whoa, what?" And he takes When his wife found out she was pregnant, and he said he wanted to give the kid the specific K name, I don't even know why she starts digging around, but she starts digging around. She eventually finds out this story from people in town. Nobody wants to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But she finds out about these hauntings and about all the deaths, and she knows that unless she does something bad's going to happen to her as yet unborn child.
Which it does anyway.
Yeah.
Which it does anyway.
And one of my favorite things about this reveal about Sarah is that earlier on, it's not really made clear yet that Sarah and her family were going to be such a huge part of the plot. And you just hear about them being part of kind of the landscape of this town as it was being built by the families that are there now. And he says something just so precious, how it was so strange. They stayed, and then all of a sudden they just kind of picked up and left, and nobody knew. Right. I guess they just decided they wanted to move on. And I'm reading it going, okay,
I bet not,
that seems unlikely.
Yeah.
I bet there's a very specific reason why they suddenly picked up and disappeared and moved on.
Why the only black family that was living in a town filled with people who had served in the Civil War. Mm-hmm. And there's do you remember that bit where they go into, this is evil abacus grandpa, I think, is talking in the past, and he's talking about how he served for the Union not because he hated slavery, but because he hated those damned rebs.
They tried to leave the United States because they didn't like the rules.
I'm still a bigot. Don't get me wrong. But I can't stand a traitor. And so it's oh gosh. Of course they just left because they wanted to. Idiot.
Right. I loved the way it was drawn. I was just really side-eyeing it hard at the time because I was sort of usually Stephen King doesn't shy away from this kind of stuff too much. So why? And I sort of let it go because I just figured, well, it's not, a main part of this plot. But then it turns out it's the whole thing. And I was like, all right. Well, I should have trusted you a little bit more, I guess. And there's the moment with his, what's the name of the caretaker of his house that watches it and makes sure everything's running?
Is it Bill?
Is it Bill? Is it Billy Dean?
Yeah.
Bill Dean? Jimmy Dean?
Yeah, because the sister's name is Carla Dean, the one who
died. Yes.
Yeah.
And he's talking to him about I wonder why they moved on. And he's like, well, they were just wanderers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, this is one of those moments where you're suddenly like, somebody says something on Facebook and you're like, oh no,
You've
need
been
to
revealed.
unfriend you.
Yeah, right. And even Mike is like, well, there was another word.
Yeah.
That you were going to say instead of wanderers.
You can totally see. It's like when you see somebody that you thought was mostly rational, but the thing they commented on pops up in your feed.
Yeah.
Because they don't realize, and so you see their like horrific response to something, and you're like, oh, you would never say that where I could see it, because you don't know that I can see this. And I was like, yeah, this is something I think we're all growing a little bit more familiar with recently, buddy.
Ooh.
Sorry.
So the algorithm got you again.
This gross injustice visited on this woman 100 years ago is this racial horrific murder and crime that then is like haunting the town forever. And that's like an interesting, that's a little bit bigger than just, the family's sins, land on its descendants. It's a little bit more about like America writ large, but still very specific to this small town. That's what kind of happens at the end of the book, and then like that ghost has to be expunged for anybody to live calmly and safely. There are a couple things that happen in the middle of the book that I don't want us to miss.
Sure.
One of which you alluded to earlier, Natasha, is the crazy dream that happens.
Oh my God.
So we've met
You're
Maddie.
You're going to have to be more specific.
Well, we've met Maddie. We know who Sarah is, and we know that Joe is also in the house. So
sure.
There's a dream that happens. Would you like to take it away?
I really wouldn't.
Okay.
Oh man, there's just like, is it a foursome when they're all separate?
He's having sex with each of them in a different room in his house simultaneously in his dream.
Oh yeah, this one.
So okay, like this is one of those moments where I'm listening to this as the audiobook, and I'm like, I really wish that I had the book right now, because I can't trust the words I'm hearing in my brain.
Yeah.
This doesn't make any sense. And then he has, I don't know how many of you have listened to this audiobook, but
No.
it's narrated by Stephen King.
Oh, that's
My
right.
goodness gracious.
He's not the best.
He's not the best.
He's not, like, he has this weird sort of flatness that he brings to things sometimes. And when he's like reading as Sarah with her accent, it can get a little off and strange, and the whole thing's so off and strange already.
Because he sometimes does like a bit of dialect stuff, and I could see him reading it being like pretty off-putting, depending on how he handles it. But so it was once it ended and it's clear that it was a dream, I was like, I don't know what did I just hear? Like, I had to go back. I didn't want to, but I had to go back and read it on paper and be like, okay, so exactly what I heard is the thing that I heard. Okay, that's too bad. Well.
But yeah, I just don't really like. It's things like this that I am kind of like, what was the purpose of it though? I don't understand, other than, Sarah was raped, but it doesn't feel like this is a commentary about that.
Yeah, because at this point in the book, we don't know that yet. So you don't even, as you're experiencing it, you're like, why is she sort of sexually terrorizing him?
Well, and you're not even sure what her connection to the story is yet, or if she's supposed to be good or bad or neither, or just what the deal is. Maybe it's just like, oh, could a guy with a low sperm count have sex with 3 people at once?
Well, but okay, so remember this. He wakes up and he's like not sure he's also not sure what happened. And he wakes up, he goes down to his typewriter, and he finds that he has typed out like a crazy page of text, and it says, Joe, Sarah, Maddie, Joe, Sarah, Maddie, 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 Sarah, Sarah, Joe, Johanna, Sarah, Joe, Maddie, Sarah, Joe, and then in lowercase, a couple lines down, normal sperm count, sperm norm, all's rosy.
Holy shit. I did not remember that, in fact.
And like this ghost,
I remember it now.
Sarah Tidwell clearly is like, haha, low sperm count. Get it?
That's so like, it's just such an unintentional, because the lead up to Sarah's rape is that Computer Man's grandpa, is like trying to confront her on this walkway that he considers
Yeah.
totally off limits to her, and she's walking up and down it like a white person, and he's not cool with it. So he wrangles up a bunch of people who are only really like half-heartedly behind this, but he's such a
Yeah.
compelling personality that they're sucked into it in a way, not trying to keep the responsibility from falling on them as well, but there is a sort of personality that can make things seem like a good idea in the moment when they're not. And she not only doesn't back down when he confronts her, but she gets in his face and he falls on his ass and tears his pants.
Yeah, it's very
And-
goofy.
Right?
She laughs at him.
And that's
And
the
that
moment.
ends up being the final indignity. Yeah.
And there's something about this, like, oh, I'm gonna reference your sperm count, you dick. Like, she's just like, hey, I'm gonna humiliate you men in every way I can because apparently y'all can't handle that. So let
Yeah.
me just keep on poking at whatever I
That's a
know
good point.
is your sore spot. Which I don't know if that was an intentional thing, but I really want to believe that because honestly, we're not supposed to be rooting for Sarah in this story, and I kind of was. Because
I was- yeah.
Fuck all these guys.
Yeah, I had a lot of trouble with that, actually.
Because she's this malevolent, evil presence, and then by the time
Well,
that
and then
you're...
you find out, like,
Yeah.
85% of the way through the book, actually she is the real victim. And like, yeah, we do feel bad also for the innocent 3-year-old girl, but it really is too bad that you end up like the actual guy who you can really hate without feeling bad about it, evil computer grandpa and his whole family, ends up like not being that huge
No.
of a
He
factor.
kills himself.
there's a cool scene where his like woman companion throws rocks at Mike while he's in the lake. They knock
I
him into the
loved
lake
this
and
so
throw a bunch of
much.
rocks at him. It's amazing.
I can't even overstate. I was like, that part, I was listening to it just like, oh, no way.
Yeah,
like,
right.
just this old woman, like ex-softball player.
Yeah.
Just beaning him.
Well,
And
and like the audacity of this evil grandpa in his like super rich guy motorized
His, like, super
wheelchair,
scooter, yeah.
being like, "Yo, she was an all-star softball pitcher. Let's go!" And she's just like, he's like, "Oh, what does Kyra call her? She calls her the White Nana because
Yeah,
of her
White
hair."
Nana.
And so it's like a Pokemon match. It's like White Nana, go! And she just starts hurling rocks at this guy in the lake. He almost eats it. Like he almost
Yeah,
dies.
it was
in there.
Very
super
close.
effective.
He gets saved by a ghost. But then old guy just like dies, and then it's like, okay.
And you run
I
into
was
him in
so
a dream a
suspicious
couple
of
times,
this.
but yeah, he's not the ultimate
big bad.
antagonist.
Yeah.
Like you end up the ultimate antagonist ends up being this poor woman who like unspeakable horror was visited upon her for no reason at all.
Yeah.
And that ends up being the person who we're supposed to. And to be fair, like the book is also like in the little epilogue where it just kind of explains everything point by point.
In case you missed it.
It also makes it clear that like Mike feels sorry for Sarah.
Yeah, true.
But I think this may also tie into some other King stuff I'm just not familiar with. But like there was some otherworldly like super ghost that the Sarah ghost
The
had tapped
outsider.
into. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Who is like even worse and sort of raging out of control and I don't know.
This was something, because I kind of wondered if that wasn't like, and maybe it is a tie-in, that would explain part of it, but I like the idea that the whole deal with, first of all, there being a black community moving in on our space, outsiders in that sense.
Sure.
Mike is constantly reminded, like, you're not from here. We don't know you. Like, we're
Yeah,
nice to you and we accept you for the most part, but never think that you're part of this town. And so for there to like be this like ultimate outsider kind of, although I do kind of wish that this wasn't a factor because it just being Sarah would feel so... I feel like the fact that she had to enlist help to wreak
sure.
her revenge kind of like takes away a little of the impact of that for me. And also, I just like the idea that it wasn't just what happened to her, but the fact that the entire town kind of knows what happened and they don't want to address and that I think is like when Craig, when you were talking about this being a like symbolic of the United States in general, is really the thing, right? Is that, yeah, we know that this happened, but people don't want to face up to it and address it and admit that this is still here in our face.
Yeah. Right.
And I feel like she's like, you are going to acknowledge me. And if that means that I take your children away, well, that's kind of on you, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Which, yes.
Well, and there's that's an interesting read of this book, because you look at Mike being like, oh, but there's this whole thing that you alluded to, Andrew, where he thinks that his family is from a different part of Maine and that he doesn't have any possible connection to the generation that committed this crime, and then like it comes out that he did, and that is an interesting thing to consider, where it's like, yeah, if you go back far enough, you're related to someone who's guilty if you're not guilty now.
Yeah,
like,
right.
And just what are you going to do about that? And Mike is trying to be a good guy most of the time when he's not gazing all over the place. But in this particular instance, it's interesting to be like, no, we're all still part of the problem, dude. Like, welcome aboard.
Yeah, like that. Those issues are really, really interesting, and they are, I think, the most interesting, and I don't know if successful is the right word, but like the most thought-provoking part of the book.
Yeah,
certainly.
Sure.
It's just the main issue is that they feel a little incidental. Like you brush up against them, but like the main point is Mike and his like dealing with Joe's death and dealing with his relationship with Maddie and with Kyra and with this whole community, and then just like as a side story, you get all this really like racially charged stuff about like who is responsible now for stuff that their like forefathers did, and like how do you make that right, and can you make it right, and I don't know.
Yeah, I have to agree. Like, I was kind of disappointed to realize how far we were in the book by this point.
Yeah,
because
sure.
I thought there was going to be some more digging in on this, and instead he brings up this incredibly like compelling and frankly emotionally draining part of the story.
Yeah.
Drops it on you and then is like, and then we stopped the ghost, the end. And I'm like, hold on though, what?
Yeah. And that follows this, like, as he even points out, this very convenient Raymond Chandler action sequence, which is another one like, oh, let me hand wave over a plot device that I'm using to cause the climax of my book, where there's like a gunfight at the end of a barbecue.
Yeah, that felt really just like really apart from the entire rest of the book at that point.
Where we're like celebrating the custody like win because evil grandpa died, and then like his minions show up and bad things happen. After this is a good struck me funny, Andrew. I really want you to do this at a party that we go to, Andrew.
Oh, boy.
They're throwing a barbecue, and Maddie says to Mike, "Can you go in and get the boombox? We need to play some music." And he goes in, grabs a boombox and some CDs, and walks outside. And I am quoting this book. He says, "Hey guys, let's rock."
Oh, precious baby.
And then a couple pages later, there's like a huge gunfight.
Jeez.
Like, are we now? Okay, y'all might be able to clarify this for me a bit. Are we supposed to think that Sarah is so desperate to get her hands on Kyra that she's sort of orchestrated this gunfight in order to get the custody of Kyra to the white nanny so that she would kill the little girl?
That's an interesting point. It's hard to tell, actually.
Now, there are a lot of explicit examples of Sarah like working through the people in the town who are not like working entirely on their own like free will to sort of hem Mike in and try and keep him away from Maddie and Kyra, and to try and keep Maddie and Kyra there, like to keep them from leaving.
Right.
But yeah, this is the spot where like the actual real world like legal machinations of this Devore evil computer grandpa family and the supernatural stuff sort of collide, because
Yeah.
like evil computer grandpa ends up committing suicide, and so Maddie and everybody all think, oh hey, he's dead, I don't have to worry about him trying to take my daughter anymore, and it ends up they were just playing like 10-dimensional chess, and they were like 20 steps ahead of him the whole time. Sarah is trying to work through Mike to kill Kyra, and I guess when that fails and like Mike fights back, the ghost just sort of like works on whoever is the next most convenient person in line.
Sure.
I don't know, but
Okay. Yeah, it was sort of strange because at the end of the audiobook, there's a break and then there's an interview with Stephen King. And it's just weird to have him be the narrator for the whole thing and then to suddenly have somebody else interviewing him. And he is talking about how he really wanted there. And I was just, once I heard him say this, I'm like, that wasn't anyone's takeaway, right? He wanted there to be this huge conflict within Mike about this girl that he's into that is just too young for him. And that was like a major focus in his interview about how there's just moments where you're faced with this sort of conundrum, and that Maddie's death really just sort of erased the problem for him, and he never actually had to make that choice and decide whether or not he was going to pull the trigger on something that was maybe inappropriate. And it was just such a weird, like, so you killed her so that you didn't have to have Mike be maybe less likable character?
Oh, no.
And treating her, she's a grown woman. Yeah, she's younger than him, but she because
also
she's
can make
younger,
her own decisions. Like, Jesus.
Yeah, it was just such a bizarre thing that he brought up a couple times.
You get you get a little tiny bit of that from Mike, where he is like, oh, she's pretty young though, but it's. Like, it's in that same tone of voice that you would use where you're like, I shouldn't have another piece of cake. Where you're like,
I don't know what you're talking about, I'm sure.
You know 100% that you have already decided you're going to have that piece of cake. But if you have like an internal conflict, like a fake conflict about it, maybe you'll feel a little like better about it. I don't know.
And he also spends, I believe him way more when he is he's concerned about the appearances. He's concerned about the situation given the custody battle. He doesn't, even though he breaks his own rules and his lawyer's rules, he's concerned about the town seeing them together and what that might do to their legal standing, et cetera, et cetera. I buy that way more than any sort of like, she's a little young. Like that,
yeah, agreed.
I don't remember him saying that too often. And he also doesn't spend too much on a like I'm a widower bit either. There's a little bit where his brother-in-law is like, "Hey, you should like go have some fun, dude. Like, go for it." And he's like, "Meh, I don't know."
Yeah, there goes a character I could have like seen a lot more of and been happy with it.
Frank
he seemed
Arlen.
really fun.
Yeah. So that seemed, that's an interesting thing for him to say at the end of the audiobook.
Isn't that like, I really would kind of love to have interviews with authors at the end of every audiobook and just hear their bizarre fixation on a thing that you didn't care about while you were reading, and they're acting like this was sort of like, I didn't even notice that, and there's this odd part where Mike Noonan's reflecting on how he wrote in so many easy, quick deaths of characters and how cheap and unnecessary it feels now that he's actually seen someone die that way, which is such a weird moment because I'm like, I don't know what he's trying to say there. Like, King, you wrote that though, and I'm feeling like you're saying this, but you also don't, like, you did it. What's my takeaway supposed to be on that?
Yeah, right, exactly. Especially like this is positioned as some big like rebrand for him, and it's ending on such a strange, inconclusive note about like how these kinds of books are written and operate. I don't know.
And especially after listening to him address like, oh, well, I kind of had her killed off so he didn't have to make that choice. And I'm like, you say in the text how cheap and easy that kind of death is. And then in the interview directly afterward, you're like, well, yeah, and it just seems like you're confirming your own. Maybe that is the point.
Yeah.
But especially when Maddie feels like a character that isn't fleshed out.
Well, that's all he had to work with, though. Cut him a break.
Yeah,
just a girl from a trailer park.
What's he supposed to do with this?
What's he supposed to do with this fictional character that he made up? He can't make her any more interesting.
And he can't, he has her have this. Listen. They're at this barbecue, and she stands on a frisbee and dances.
And
don't tell me you've never been to a party where someone danced on a frisbee.
Yeah, right.
Come on.
Yeah, I mean, the party's really started when the frisbee dancing.
Somebody starts dancing on the frisbee.
We're way off the beaten path at this point, but yeah, that party's weird because it's a bunch of dudes and Maddie and Kyra, and everybody's getting a little drunk at 12 in the afternoon.
Same.
And she starts dancing off frisbee, which also she was bad at catching the frisbee when she was wearing her party shoes, but then she put on sneakers and she's good at frisbee now. And now she's dancing on it, and all the dudes just stop and stare at her.
She was wearing her party shoes on her hands. It was really not a good
whole thing.
It didn't make any sense.
Well, and then also all those men get gunned down, and you only find out what happens to one of them.
So they have this frisbee dance. All these dudes stop, are entranced by her siren song.
Mm-hmm. It's a very, very horny barbecue.
And then they all get shot. She her brain is mangled and it's horrifying. And yeah, you don't find out. He just takes the little girl, runs
back
home.
to his
There's
haunted
huge,
house.
Right? Get the fuck out of town, dude. What are you doing? Everybody knows where you live. Why are you going to the one place everybody knows where you live? Get out. But I guess it's supposed to be Sarah's kind of gotten a hold of him by that point, sort of, because it's kind of imperceptible to slide into this fugue where he's drugging Kyra.
And then maybe going to drown
filling
her.
A bathtub. And the only reason he gets out of that is Joe's ghost, I guess.
And then Maddie's ghost also shows up to help fight.
Yeah, she's like a river monster.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I forgot Maddie shows up. Oh, this book. And I'm talking about it, and it sounds like I hated it, and I didn't. It was
I didn't either.
I found it a fun read,
read,
but yeah, now we're talking about stuff, and I'm like, oh no,
it's I would be. I think this book, what it really needed was a serious structural edit, and I think the problem is that by the time you get to where King was in his career when he wrote this, nobody is going to give you a big nobody's going to give you big structural notes on a thing that you wrote because you've already thrown this big public hissy fit about how much money you're getting paid, and nobody can tell you no anymore. And so if you have this book where the most interesting stuff is backgrounded, it starts with 150 pages of character notes that you don't strictly really need to enjoy the entire rest of the book. There is a really interesting throwback gothic horror novel here, I think. But
the kind of logic agnostic storytelling of this dream state. There's a time travel dream. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on that I'm really down for, and really with him to find out, what you said earlier, turn into a new chapter. Am I in a dream or not? Is this real or not? I don't really care. We'll find out. I'm here for that. But yeah, from a information, where do we get it and when? I don't need it to all line up perfectly, but it would be helpful if it came in a slightly different order, and you maybe ditch some of that publishing angst at the beginning.
Here's something that really gets to one of the ideas he grapples with, and I actually really, really love is so this is Mike going up to Sarah Laughs, and he says, just how scared was I as I approached Sarah Laughs? I don't remember. I suspect that fright, like pain, is one of those things that slip our minds once they have passed. What I do remember is a feeling I'd had before when I was down here, especially when I was walking this road by myself. It was a sense that reality was thin. I think it is thin, thin as lake ice after a thaw, and we fill our lives with noise and light and motion to hide that thinness from ourselves. But in places like Lane 42, you find that all the smoke and mirrors have been removed. What's left is the sound of crickets and the sight of green leaves darkening toward black, branches that make shapes like faces, the sound of your heart in your chest, the beat of the blood against the backs of your eyes, and the look of the sky as the day's blue blood runs out of its cheek. And some of the stuff that he does with, like some of the later dream sequences, like the line between what is a dream and what is actually really happening is explicitly just removed a couple of times.
Which is really fun.
Yeah, and I think those spots where what is real is just up in the air is some of the more interesting stuff that the book is doing, especially from like a horror perspective.
Agreed. Yeah, I feel like the way that it's sort of, he's like the George Lucas of writing, I feel like. It's just nobody wants to be like, hey, you know what? That's cool, but what if we didn't do that at all?
Exactly.
I've been trying to get started on this novel, and I'm doing character like introductions, and there have been more than one time where I have gotten 20 pages in and been like, oh, you know what? Nobody's going to care about this at all. This is all for me. I needed to know this, but I got to cut all of this, which is just a bummer. But at the same time, you kind of, and he doesn't have to do that anymore. He's come around. It goes full circle where you're an amateur and you don't because you don't realize you should. Then you do, you get successful, and then you don't because you don't have to. And you're going to buy my book anyway, suckers. Well, you know what? Good for him. I hope to someday be able to yell suckers as I put whatever the hell I want into my best-selling novel.
I hope that people tell me that I'm a genius auteur for so long that I myself begin to believe it.
Same.
I think that's probably some pretty good stopping point. I think we've touched on, I think we hit more of the book than I expected we would, because there's just so much of it.
There is a lot of it, yeah.
You kept bringing up stuff that I was like, oh my God, I forgot about that ridiculous thing.
It does. It just kind of washes over you. I'll, as we kind of close out, I will just say that first sequence with the thumping in the basement, that was a little spooky. I was reading that at like midnight, and I couldn't decide if I wanted to keep reading or if I should just try to go to bed right away. That was effective. That got me.
I was sitting outside during that point, and the sun had gone down, and I had a tiki torch, and that was the only light, and it was dark, and I was like, this was such a mistake. Why did I do this to myself? I took a photo of like my little reading nook and put it on Instagram and was like, this is a bad idea. Because I couldn't shake it after that. I was just like alone in my house, like, babe, when are you coming home? Kept texting my boyfriend like every 10 minutes. Are you almost here? Because, I cut. So my recommendation is everyone just skip the first 200 pages. Just get right into that sucker, and you'll love it. It'll be great.
Just like the man intended. Just like the king intended.
All right. Well, guys, this was super fun.
Yeah,
thanks
for doing this. This was great.
Yeah, it was great.
And thank you, listeners, so much for joining us this evening on this. This was us talking about a ostensibly spooky book in the least spooky way. Would you like to do your plugs and let everybody know where they can find you?
Oh, yeah. We're on social media like most people.
We have a brand.
We have a brand. We're at twitter.com/overduepod or facebook.com/overduepod. And Andrew, what's our website?
It's www.overduepodcast.com. That www stands for World Wide Web, and it's very important.
And
it's 2017. Why am I still saying www?
I wasn't going to say anything, but when you started off with that, I was like, wow, all right. We're doing the whole thing.
And the fun thing there is that if you haven't listened to the show, we do have like a new listeners page. So if you like want to find some episodes that we are particularly proud of or think are good entry points, you can check that out. So, yeah.
Sweet. I highly recommend everybody that you go and listen to their Choose Your Own Adventure episodes, which are delightful and often quite disappointing. Not your faults. And for those who are listening on the Overdue feed and don't know me, you can find me at unspoiledpodcast.com, facebook.com/unspoiledpod, Twitter at unspoiledshow, and Instagram at unspoiledpodcast. And this is really the only show that I do that has this kind of format. Usually what I do is cover TV shows or book series, and one person has read it and the other person has not, and we're covering it one episode or one chapter at a time.
Cool.
Which is super fun because then you get to taunt people who don't know what's about to happen. And we just finished Harry Potter, and my co-host Rashawn, I asked her when we started, so what do you know about this series? And she goes, there's they have like wands. That's what she knew. I thought that she had seen the movies or something. Nothing. She had no idea.
That is
so.
I don't even know how
you found a unicorn.
Yeah.
That's what we called her, the unicorn. And yeah, there were times when she was right on and nailed some predictions to the point that people were like DMing me going, she's spoiled, you're lying. And I'm like, I swear I'm not. But then she would make strange mistakes, like trying to figure out what prongs meant. What kind of animal did Harry's dad turn into? And lobster was the thing that she zeroed in on and decided that was probably the most likely, because prongs, she couldn't figure out what else that could apply to. So highly recommend that feed, everybody.
Great.
All right. Well, I hope you guys, what are you reading next for Spooktober?
Oh,
as we record this, we're reading a couple of Edgar Allan Poe stories. As you're listening to it, our next one will probably be actually Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice, which is going to be a fun one, I think.
Or House of Leaves. Those are the two next big books that we're doing for Spooktober. So
cool.
Yeah, so check those out.
Yeah, my next one is going to be The Haunting of Hill House.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh,
that's a good one.
Yeah, I read that last year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, check that out, too. All right. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a lovely evening, everybody, and I'll leave you with my my traditional sign-off, which is toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.